All right, what's up, Dragon Brew? Today we're going to talk about all the two-color combinations of decks that are performing really well on Magic Arena right now. And this is for January 2025. And I do want to say that if y'all are interested in these deck lists, I will have links down below to Moxfield. They are a channel sponsor, but that's where we host our decks if you want to find any of these. And if y'all will be sure to like the video, hopefully we see a lot of comments and likes. And if y'all enjoy these videos, we'll try to do them monthly and give you updates on what the format looks like. With that being said, let's talk about 10 decks. If you want to buy anything in today's video, or anything else for Magic, be sure to check out Tales of Adventure, where they're constantly getting restocks because they set up at events all across the country. And it doesn't matter if you're looking for high-end stuff, top sellers for standard, or just cool foils to bling out your commander deck. They've got you covered. And you could use code DRAGON, DRAGN, to save 5% on everything you get on their website. Alright, the first one we're going to talk about here is what I'm going to put in quotes as Gruul aggro. It's really more like red-green. It's just red splashing green, but it is the most popular deck playing red and green. But it's mostly just what you expect. It's the mice that really either double strike, have prowess, or give you extra cards effectively. So you got Emberheart Challenger, Heartfire Hero, that when it dies, you deal extra damage. It is playing some Hired Claw just because of the bonus damage here. Manifold Mouse giving stuff double strike, obviously. This version that we've seen recently finish well has played a couple of Paw Patch recruits in exchange for a couple of the Questing Druids. Some just play 4 Questing Druids straight up, and then they're splashing something like, I say splashing, playing something extra like Screaming Nemesis for some finishing damage. Otherwise, just a bunch of actual burn spells, pump spells, what you expect. And then you will see some versions that are playing Innkeeper's Talent. This is an addition we started seeing about 3 weeks ago, and this is starting to make more of an appearance in some of these decks. But generally, some version like this is what you're going to be looking for if you're looking to play red and green, at least currently in the current standard. Our next one up is Azorius, what we're calling Gen Reanimator. I don't know what the official deck is for this. Some people call it Azorius Aggro. I thought saw it Azorius Tempo. Some would just call it Azorius Reanimator. Either way, it is white and blue, and not a real surprise here. This is Aberraculus, Haughty Jin, and Picklock Prankster. These are like the key cards to this deck because you want to get this and this back onto the battlefield. Now, how are we doing that? We're drawing cards with Chart, of course, which also lets you discard stuff, so you can fill your graveyard that way. Helping Hand lets you return stuff from the graveyard. Also, Recommission lets you return these creatures back to the battlefield. Now, some versions are playing split up, some are not. The version that I have loaded does play it, but I've seen some going without this in exchange for other counters or bounce spells in that slot. Also, Moment of Truth, because again, another way to draw extra cards and get stuff into the graveyard. Of course, some number of counters. I have seen Soul Partition showing up in these lists pretty regularly, but most importantly, the card you're really looking for in here is Founding the Third Path. Sorry. This card is the other way that you're able to fill your graveyard. So the goal with this deck realistically is just put as many things as you can into your graveyard, and hopefully you start hitting targets that you want to get that are Aberrant Oculus and Haughty Jin, and then protect them. If you do that, the game goes pretty well for you. For Boros, there's a couple of versions that you could go with. I kind of looked around, and there are some that are just playing aggros, trying to splash white for some extra burn spells. There's some that are doing it for auras, but I think the most consistent one we saw was what we're going to call Boros Token Control. And here it's really about getting down, well, first off, all your control elements, right? You have stuff like Sunfall, Season of the Burrow, Get Lost, Lightning Helix, Torch the Tower. Like, this is all to slow all these other creature decks we've been talking about down so you can stick your other stuff. Namely things like Caretaker's Talent, so that you can draw more cards, right? That's actually a big deal. Temporary Lockdown, another defensive card, though most of these versions I've been seeing actually play more Caretaker's Talent than what's in this list. So I'm going to make an adjustment to the final one before it goes up for y'all. But also being able to play Urabrass Forge, because that gives you an extra creature every turn, which can trigger your Caretaker's Talent. You can also copy that token if you need to. So lots of stuff going on. Additionally, you will see these lists playing Biza, which is a way to kind of slow the opponent down, get some extra life for yourself, and Enduring Innocence. Just, again, when you're making these tokens, making 1/1s, because you do have stuff like Biza, you do have stuff like Season of the Burrow. And then this one plays a selection of Archangel Elspeth, Quintorius Khan, which again makes tokens, and Karn Living Legacy. Now, you haven't seen Karn in a lot of lists, but recently in high tournament finishes for this deck, this has been a new development that they have been playing, so I included it in this version of the list so you could try it out. All right, so next up is Dimir, and Dimir Tempo has kind of become like the recent boogeyman, if you will. It was kind of the hot deck of the moment. It's cooled off a little bit, I think, as people have learned to play against it, but it is still very good. This list is playing Kaito, the main Planeswalker we're probably seeing a lot of here recently outside of Liliana in various lists. It does playing Enduring Curiosity. This is one of the cards the deck really wants to stick, so if you can keep this off the battlefield when facing this, it's important. But if you land this while playing it, it's pretty damn good. And then a lot of stuff that you can flash in, right? So you can leave your mana up during your opponent's turn. Not just Enduring Curiosity, but also Fairy Mastermind, Flood Pitch Drowner to lock down your opponent's creature, but also possibly shuffle it back into their library. Some versions are playing Preacher of the Schism, just as a good quality card, but almost all of them are playing Spyglass Siren and 1 to 3 copies of Tishana's Tidebinder. The rest of the deck is removal, counters, kind of what you expect, but this deck, very versatile, very good. It has game against just about everything. You know, the way to beat it, though, is you have to be very careful and very patient with your spells and kind of force them to act first if you can. But this deck, very strong, and I don't even think we've seen the best final version of this deck yet. Golgari, the green-black decks. This was another very interesting one that I wasn't sure how this was going to end up on which one I was going to select, but I went through some recent results, and this list was like the best amalgamation of the Golgari decks that have been performing the best. And surprisingly, a lot of them were playing Caustic Bronco. I think that's a card people have gotten away from, and it's kind of made its way back into the format. Of course, they're all playing Glissa, because it's just fantastic, especially in a field full of enchantments. And then you also have Llanowar Elf, so no surprise there. They're playing Mosswood Dread Knight. We talked about this as one of the cards you should be crafting in our 3 cards to craft in every color, so be sure to check that out if you haven't checked that video yet. I'll try to remember to leave a link here. Also, Preacher of the Schism. Card's just really good. Makes sense that it's being played here. Another one of our cards that we said was safe to craft in that same video. Scavenging Ooze, though, is a new addition from Foundation, which performs very well. Also gives the deck some main deck options against Reanimator spells, which is really good too. Of course, Shieldred, no surprise. And then kind of your pick of the litter if you want on various removals. So Anoint with Affliction, this one plays Blot Out, Cut Down, and Go for the Throat. So varieties of removal. You also see some versions playing some number of Maelstrom Pulse as well. So nothing real crazy here. It's just like a group of good cards effectively in Gruul. Gruul good stuff is kind of what we're seeing right now. I think there was a period where we were seeing a lot of the Planeswalkers and trying to do doubling season stuff or use the talent to get double counters or whatever, but really haven't been seeing too much of that lately. The more successful Golgari lists have gone to doing the actual mid-rangey creature thing. Now I'm gonna admit, Izzet is a little tough. I think there's a couple of prowess builds that are okay, but I don't think they found the right mix to go to what I would call like the best version tier yet. But is it Hellraiser Control is what this is kind of going by, or is it Control? Is a good deck, but it's very, very complicated. And I don't even know if I'm going to waste time here talking about it, but if you do decide to play it, feel free to hop into my Discord, link in the description, and we can talk all about it. And I think I also have a video where I played this, a previous version like a season ago, so if I can look that up, I may try to leave a card here as well, so y'all can check that out if you're interested in the deck. But it plays Chandra, the new Planeswalker, really good as a finisher. It plays the other Chandra as well, so you can copy your spells. And then the biggest thing is Capricious Hellkite. So you're trying to get a bunch of spells in your graveyard so this can copy them. Then you're playing stuff for free. And then you just start chaining stuff off to do big, silly things. Namely with Season of Weaving. So you can copy one of your things. You get to keep your token. Other things get bounced. You get to replay some things. And then stuff gets very silly. It does play Ill-Timed Explosion as one of its sweepers for removal. And then you're just playing a bunch of other removal and things to try to hunt for cards and stay alive. So various burn spells, 3 steps ahead, torch the tower. Nothing real surprising, but it does get to play Brass's Tunnel Grinder. And I think this is the only standard or consistent standard deck that plays this card. So again, this is a deck, if you're going to craft it, there are several cards in here that you're only going to play in this list. You're not going to play Hellraiser anywhere else. You're probably not going to play Brass's Tunnel Grinder in many other decks. So I don't know if you want to burn your wild cards in those. If you already have them and maybe only have to craft 1 or 2 of them, it's probably worth it. But otherwise, I would also stay away from this one because the deck is also very difficult to play. I think when I played it in the video that I was talking about, like, it was very, I played it very slow for 2 or 3 games just to like get all the interactions under me. So it's very easy to mess up. Not one I would recommend unless you're just wanting to go for the complicated big brain plays, and that's the style of Magic you enjoy. All right, Orzhov kind of was pretty simple. This one was just Orzhov life gain. No real surprises here. This is exactly what you think the deck is. So it does want to play Case of Then Eat and Feast, because every time you play a creature, you gain life. It plays Leyline of Hope, so you can gain extra life. Also get to pump your creatures if you gain enough life. It also plays Sheltered by Ghosts, which removes something and gives something lifelink, right? So obviously a theme here. Creature selection is going to be pretty consistent between each version of this deck with Amalia Benavides. Yeah, you have Bloodthirsty Conqueror, which is awesome because every time your opponent loses life, you gain life. So again, contributing to the plan. Deep Cavern Bat, which gains life because of lifelink. Enduring Tenacity, which is basically a combo in this deck because whenever you gain life, your opponent loses life. And then this becomes a whole thing, combos with Bloodthirsty Conqueror, as does Starscape Cleric. Every time you gain life, your opponent loses life, and then every time your opponent loses life, you gain life, and you kind of see the pattern there. So this deck comes built in with several different little combos of gain life, lose life, which is a problem, in addition to it already being hard to punch through. So pretty cool deck. Zorline also being really powerful to get a bunch of those creatures back into play. So yeah, this one is probably the easiest of the decks to play, I would say. In general, maybe one of the 3. I guess a couple of the red decks are pretty easy as well. But this is one where you'll probably use a fair number of these cards over again, where you're talking about Amalia, Deep Cavern Bats, possibly Enduring Tenacity, because I think there'll still be a world in the future where you will play that. Zoraline, we have some other decks we have coming up on the channel where this is still being played, and it's not even a life gain or bats deck. I think the problem, though, for you people will be the Leyline of Hope if you don't already own them. I would probably only play what you already have or craft like one additional one, because there's not a lot of decks for this card, but everything else, pretty reasonable. Believe it or not, overall, Rakdos was not easy to find a good deck for. I had to hunt through some recent tournaments to find one that I felt good sharing because, for whatever reason, a lot of the Rakdos decks keep coming up just a bit short and not really having those strong finishes. But I did find this very interesting Rakdos deck, which is a combination of, like, hasty aggro mixed with skeletons, which is kind of a unique list. So, for anybody watching this is probably the one deck list you may not know about. And we'll probably feature this on the channel sometime in the next week or so, just because I found this deck very interesting. But it does play Forsaken Miner. Can't block, but it does come back from the graveyard, which is super nice. And it's a 1-mana spell. Swift Spear with haste, Screaming Nemesis, obviously damage and haste, slick shots that come over the top. It does actually play Bolt Wave for just direct damage, but it is a 1-mana spell, so I get it when you're trying to trigger the Swift Spear and the slick shot. Burst Lightning, go for the throat, Lightning Strike. So again, just kind of hammering your opponent with damage early. And then it does play Case of the Stash Skeleton, which is a creature that's hard to block. Also can let you tutor for finishing damage late in the game, which is nice. And Corpse of the Lost. So you get to make a skeleton with haste, and then if your other skeletons die, you kind of start that whole chain of stuff as well. So overall, kind of a pretty interesting and sweet deck. Not one I'd even heard about or seen, but apparently in a couple of tournaments it did well. So yeah, if you're looking to play Rakdos, this might be the best version for you. The cool part about this deck is it is fairly cheap to build. Probably, I guess you'd have to have the Case of the Stash Skeletons if you don't already, and Corpse of the Lost, but, Slick Slot, Show Off, Monastery Swift Spear, Screaming Nemesis, Burst Lightning, Lightning Strike, those are all show up in other deck lists. So the majority of this you could play in other things if you chose to do so. So not a bad one to craft if you are looking to play Rakdos. Ah, yes, this deck, Selesnya. And this is actually really cool because it's a Selesnya tokens deck that sort of came out of nowhere about 3-ish weeks ago, maybe 4. I put a deck on the channel at some point. We played it. And it's actually been evolving ever since. So this is actually a cool one. And I think this deck still has a little bit of ways to go to even be perfected in the format. But really cool, pretty resilient deck if you haven't seen it. But it does play Llanowar Elves. This version plays Malera. I don't think you need to play Malera. I think there's room for other stuff, but Malera is a very quality card. 3/3 for 2, and it can save one of your other creatures, which is a big deal. Overlord of the Mistmoors to get the tokens, but you can also get this for free, and we'll talk about that here in a second. Does play Paw Patch Recruit, which I think is great in this list for sure. And then a bunch of cards that are kind of just like good quality, right? Sandstorm Salvager makes 2 bodies and can pump all these tokens that you're making. Sanguine Evangelist, again, 2 bodies, making another token, sometimes 2 tokens. And Sky Knight Squire. So if you have all these things that are making multiple bodies, then you're getting 2 counters on this, which gives it flying very quickly. And interesting enough, it does play Soul Partition, both as a defensive and offensive card, which is very cool here. So I like this inclusion. But the biggest thing about this deck is Collector's Cage. This card's super fantastic. It was on my list of stuff that you can craft because this deck is very good. And honestly, getting something like your Overlord of the Mistmoors for free, or getting a Sandstorm Salvager after a sweeper, then like being able to pump your team, like so many little things that come from that. And it gets to play Unidentified Hovership. And it's cool because this was a card that when Duskmourn came out, everybody kind of identified as this is a card that probably should be played in Standard. And nobody really knew where. And it slowly found a home in this list. Almost 2 copies across the board in every list I saw. One of them, I think, played 3. So the card is definitely catching on with people. Just all around fun deck. Very good. Has a lot of options. It can survive sweepers. It can hold up against the aggro runs. Like lots of fun stuff with this. So if you're looking to play Selesnya, this is definitely the direction I would go. And if you've been waiting for me to say what the deck is going to be for Simic, I don't think there's a question. We're officially calling this Simic Terror Control, I believe is what I'm saying in a lot of places. But this is just a good all-around deck. Now, difficult to play. It does have some quirky plays in it, but it is very powerful if it gets the right draw or can slow their opponent down just enough, right? So the plan here really is to slow your opponent down by using stuff like This Town Ain't Big Enough, Rona's Vortex, all the while putting stuff in your graveyard using like Cash Grab, right? And building up your board with stuff like Storm Chaser's Talent and up the Beanstalk. The reason you're wanting to do all of that is that you do have these 2 key creatures, an Eddie Merc Crab, which can tap down your opponent's stuff at instant speed, which is super good, but it's cheaper for the number of instants in your graveyard, or sorceries, I guess, as well. And Tolarian Terror, kind of the same thing. It's cheaper for the number of instants and sorceries in your graveyard. So you fill those up, get big bodies your opponent can't punch through, slow them down, and then you kind of get into a cycle between stuff like Storm Chaser's Talent, and This Town Ain't Big Enough to where you can just keep bouncing it, get the spell back, and kind of keep your opponent on the ropes while you're attacking with 5/5s. Really good deck, honestly. Beatable, yes, but very good. And sometimes if your opponent stumbles, doesn't take a lot to beat them with this. So yeah, if you're looking to play Simic, this is the deck of choice for you. Now, one thing I will say is it's cool that we have a bunch of different varieties of decks, but again, before building some of these, think about the cards you might be playing in other lists or cards you saw me mention in multiple lists because those end up being safer to craft. And again, if you haven't checked it out, be sure to check out our video where we talk about the 3 best cards to craft in every color right now. So you can kind of make safer choices if you're not sure, just to give you a little bit of extra direction. Additionally, don't forget to check out merch. You can get this shirt or a bunch of other stuff. We have mugs, playmats, all kinds of stuff if you want to check that out and support the channel. But yeah, let me know what you think about this video. If you want this monthly, quarterly, whatever, I don't know when a new set drops. Something new we're trying around the channel, but if you're into it, we can make more of them. But that's all I have for you for now. We'll see you next time.